At its peak, Subway used to have more than 40,000 locations worldwide and nearly $12 billion in annual sales. But today, thousands of stores have shut down, franchisees are complaining, and the brand that taught Americans to eat fresh is struggling to find any takers for its subs. In this video, I'll talk about the rise and fall of Subway. Subway's story began in 1965 with a 17-year-old named Fred DeLuca who wanted to become a doctor and needed to raise money for college. A family friend, Dr. Peter Buck, loaned him $1,000 and suggested opening a sandwich shop. That first store, called Pete's Super Submarines, sold a few hundred sandwiches on its opening day. It wasn't an instant hit, but it worked well enough to keep going. By the mid-70s, they had 16 locations. The turning point came when Subway figured out that if you strip a restaurant down to its basics, no fryers, no grills, no complicated equipment, you can open stores quickly and cheaply. While opening a McDonald's could cost close to $1 million, a Subway franchise could be launched for around $100,000 to $150,000. That made Subway accessible to almost anyone with a little bit of savings and a lot of ambition. They decided to franchise their business, and the idea took off. By the early 80s, Subway had a few hundred stores. By 1990, it had around 5,000, and by the early 2000s, it had overtaken McDonald's in total locations. You could put a Subway almost anywhere. Strip malls, gas stations, colleges, even hospitals. Now in the 80s and 90s, the definition of healthy had started to change to low-fat, high-carb food pyramid eating. Bread, low-fat meat, and fresh veggies became good, whereas greasy, high-fat burgers became bad. Moreover, people were getting fed up with the kind of impersonal, standardized food that places like McDonald's were offering. They wanted to have their food customized. Subway was perfectly positioned to ride that wave with their Eat Fresh branding and the ability to let customers add their own lettuce, tomatoes, turkey, and bread exactly as they wanted. Then Subway caught one of the luckiest breaks ever. In the late 1990s, Jared Fogle, a college student from Indiana, claimed he had lost over 200 pounds by sticking to a very strict diet of 2 Subway sandwiches a day. Subway picked up the story because it fit well with their healthy image, and over the next decade, made Jared the face of the brand.
I really did lose 245 pounds eating Subway sandwiches, and I managed like a whole person and a half.
He starred in hundreds of commercials, helping Subway tie itself to a weight loss, discipline, and healthier eating story at a time when Americans were craving for an alternative to burgers and fries. As the trend caught on, sales kept climbing and new stores kept opening, and by the early 2010s, Subway had grown to roughly 44,000 locations worldwide. At the time, it looked unstoppable, but a lot of the decisions that had fueled this growth were quietly stacking up, and soon the cracks began to show. Quick pause. If you're liking the video, make sure to subscribe and help us reach our target of 5,000 subs. Thanks! As Subway kept expanding, stores continued opening in a lot of the same markets, often very close to existing locations. Instead of pulling customers away from competitors, many of those new stores were pulling business from other nearby Subways. It started showing up in the numbers. The average Subway location was bringing in somewhere around $425,000 to $440,000 a year, which was noticeably lower than what a lot of other sandwich chains were doing. Some of them were generating roughly twice that per store. For franchise owners, that meant thinner margins and tougher math. But the pain wasn't so obvious to the people managing Subway because the franchising model they had followed was lopsided in favor of the firm. While opening a Subway franchise cost much less than other fast food chains, franchisees had to pay as much as 8% of their margins in royalties and another 4.5% in marketing fees later on. So the managers over at Subway really had no incentive to slow down the expansion spree despite all the noise, because every new franchisee gave them more money. Almost everyone remembers the $5 Footlong. At the time, people saw it as a brilliant marketing move, and in the short term, it was. Introduced during the 2008 recession, when everyone was starved of cash and looking for deals, the $5 promotion drove a lot of traffic towards Subway outlets. Same-store sales jumped as much as 20% in some markets, and the promotion drove roughly $3.8 billion in annual sales at its peak. But it also changed how customers thought about Subway. People began to associate the brand with cheap rather than healthy. As food and labor costs rose, franchisees struggled to make money on sandwiches. Customers continued to expect to pay just $5 for. Subway tried to pull back from the promotion, then brought it back in a slightly different form. Each time, it frustrated owners more and reinforced the price expectations customers had already formed. In the mid-2010s, Subway also started dealing with a steady stream of negative headlines. There were questions about ingredient quality, investigations into chicken content, a ruling in Ireland that Subway's bread had too much sugar to legally be considered bread, lawsuits over portion sizes and advertising claims. Later, there was a dispute over whether Subway's tuna was actually tuna. For a company that spent decades positioning itself as the fresher, healthier alternative, repeated questions about food quality carried more weight than they might have for a traditional fast food chain. At the same time, public ideas about health were shifting. Fresh started to mean fewer additives, simpler ingredients, and food prepared on site. Healthy started to mean fresh ingredients, fewer preservatives, and food prepared in-store. Chains like Chipotle, Sweet Green, Jersey Mike's, and Panera leaned into that shift. Subway didn't even begin slicing meat in stores until much later, long after customers had started noticing the difference elsewhere. Then in 2015, Jared Fogle was arrested and later convicted on charges involving child abuse. Subway cut ties immediately, but the damage was lasting because Jared had been tied to the brand for over a decade. That same period also marked a leadership turning point. Founder Fred DeLuca had been diagnosed with leukemia in 2013 and passed away in 2015. His absence exposed how centralized decision-making had been. The company cycled through strategies without fixing the underlying issues: oversaturation, franchisee frustration, and a brand that no longer matched how people thought about food. Sales began falling as store closures accelerated, with Subway closing nearly 1,000 locations in some years. By the early 2020s, US store count had dropped by roughly 25% from its peak. In the late 2010s and early 2020s, Subway tried making changes. They brought in refreshed menus, remodeled the stores, and invested heavily in meat slicers so stores could prepare ingredients on site. They also pushed digital ordering and loyalty programs. But then the pandemic happened and made things worse. Subway was slower to pivot than its competitors, and many franchisees struggled through reduced foot traffic and rising costs. In 2023, after nearly 6 decades as a family-owned business, Subway agreed to sell itself to Roark Capital for around $9 billion. Just a few years earlier, the brand had been valued closer to $12 billion. Roark specializes in franchise systems, and its early moves focused on stabilizing operations rather than expanding. Subway still has around 37,000 locations globally, which gives it scale most brands would kill for. But scale alone isn't a strategy. The question remains whether Subway can redefine what it's supposed to be in a food landscape that has clearly moved on. If you like this deep dive, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what brand you want covered next, and what Subway meant to you back in its prime.